Hi there, this is Greg from the Fresh Bread Daily. Today we will be making oyster crackers. You probably know oyster crackers only from the little packets that you got when you ordered soup somewhere. It came, 10 to a little packet, free. Probably put them in your mom's purse. She brought them out, gave them to you. These are different. These are gonna be just tiny little delicious crackers. It's probably one of the easiest baking projects you could do. It takes about 5 minutes to mix it all up, let it sit for about 15 minutes, and then we're gonna roll it out. We're gonna punch out the little crackers, and then they bake for about another 15 minutes, and then you have crackers. So if you're making soup tonight, you can have crackers to sprinkle on your soup by the time the soup is done. So the equipment that you need for this, not much. You need a cutting board, you need a rolling pin. The key is this guy, which you may have. This is just the tip to a cupcake icing kit. I've never iced the cupcakes with it. So, but this little guy is the perfect size to punch out all the little crackers. So if you can't find this, you don't need it, but it's gonna be helpful. It's gonna make a nice little round oyster cracker. If you don't have this, you can just use a sharp knife when we get to that point, and you can cut little squares, and then you have square crackers, which aren't really oyster crackers, but it's the same thing. So you can call them square oyster crackers if you want. So let's get to this. All right. Oh, there goes the dog. I got the cheese out, so she's on cheese patrol. So the key to making these is very simple. Get your bowl. We're going to get a cup of just regular all-purpose flour. Put that in your bowl. And then to that, we are going to add 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, not baking soda. Put that in there. And then we are going to add a teaspoon of sugar. And then to that, I'm going to add smoked paprika to it. You do not have to add this part, but I think it gives it a nice little flavor and some color. So 1 teaspoon of that. So far it's just a bunch of teaspoons. And then got all that in there. And then 1/4 cup of shredded cheese. You can use cheddar. This is some sort of blend. It says it's cheddar cheese, Monterey Jack. Doesn't matter, just shredded cheese. And you can leave the cheese part out too. But again, if we're making cheesy oyster crackers, you gotta put some cheese in it, so. And then to that, I've got some butter that I've cubed up. It's just 2 tablespoons of butter. I've chopped it into small pieces. We're gonna drop that into there. And then the final ingredient is we have a 1/3 cup of just water. So we're gonna put that all in the bowl, and then with our hand, we're just gonna mix it. We're gonna mix and we're gonna mix. And it'll start coming together. It'll get a little sticky at first. So we're gonna start squeezing it together with your hands. And then kind of gets to about that consistency. It's all over your hands. At this point, I usually dump it out onto the board. It's pretty shaggy. There's always a little bit of flour that's kind of hanging out there on the bottom. So I'm gonna move that there and then get some of it off my hands. There's always gonna be dough on your hands when you're doing this kind of stuff. So then we're just gonna kind of knead it together. The goal here is to get all that dry flour wet. So we're gonna, as we do this a few times, we're gonna just keep squishing it. And you'll see that it's starting to get a little stickier as that butter melts a little bit and the dry flour is disappearing. We don't have to get everything out of here, but you want it to start looking like it's all made of the same thing instead of all the different separate ingredients in there. But you may still see some butter sticking out. And obviously the cheese is a little different than the thing. So what I'm gonna do is just keep doing it here because it's starting to stick to the board. But do this a few times, and then we have a pretty cohesive ball. It's still a little shaggy looking. It's not perfectly smooth. That's perfectly fine. We're gonna do that, and then we're gonna put this back into the bowl. Doesn't matter if there's a little flour in there. And then we're gonna put a towel over it, let this sit for about 15 minutes. That's gonna allow the flour to fully get wet, hydrate, and then we'll move on to the next step. So let it sit for 15 minutes and clean off your board because we're gonna need it. Okay, so now it has been about 15 minutes. Our dough has been sitting there resting. Now I've cleaned off my board. I'm gonna dirty it. I'm gonna put flour over the board. We're gonna take our ball of dough that's been sitting there. Now we're just gonna roll this out. It's a little sticky sometimes, so you wanna make sure that your board has plenty of flour. You have to pat it out a bit to make sure that it's not gonna start immediately sticking. Take our rolling pin, and the goal here is just to roll it out as thin as possible, but also checking every once in a while to make sure that it's not gonna stick, because we're gonna use our little cutter to cut these out, so we don't want any of this dough stuck to the board. It's just not gonna work. So it's looking good. I'm gonna put a little more flour on there. And then keep going. So sometimes when you're rolling it out, it starts to shrink back up. So you just keep going. You just keep rolling from all different angles. Sometimes you let it sit and rest for a minute before you continue. But I'm not being very patient because I'm filming and it's looking pretty good. So we'll keep lifting it to make sure that it's not stuck. And we'll do it one last flip. And now we're gonna get to the fun part. So as I was saying before, we're gonna take our little icing tip, and it's a perfect little size to, you can see this, make little holes. And I find that if you go at kind of an angle and then down, it doesn't stick into the hole. So this is what we're ultimately going for, is this little tiny Cheez-It. And then I've got a cutting board over, or not a cutting board, I've got a tray. You don't want to spend your time doing each one and then lifting. So I'll show you that it's best to go at an angle, do a whole bunch of them. You can do them pretty rapidly. Just making sure you can see what I'm doing here. Some of them are going to start popping out. What you don't want is for it to get stuck in the hole each time, because then you have to take a toothpick and pop it through the hole, and it just kind of gets annoying like that. Sometimes you have to pop it out. Anyway, once you do a whole bunch of those, then you can peel back the dough, and you'll have little guys all over your board, and then you're just gonna throw these over here onto over here. There. And it doesn't matter if, when you're picking them up, if they get scrunched or crunched, because you're gonna have so many of them, and you're gonna toss them in your soup anyway. It doesn't matter if they're perfectly round or if they're bent, but we just keep going. So, like I was saying too, if if you don't have this little contraption, you can just use a knife and cut them into little squares. But can't go wrong with little tiny square crackers. So I encourage you to find one of these guys. All right. So you just do this to the entire batch of dough. And then when you're done, you can roll the dough back up into a ball and roll it out again to use up all these scraps. You can do that a few times. And so you should end up, I don't know how many, I didn't count those, but what you will have in the end is a whole baking sheet. I lined up our baking sheet with parchment, and you'll fill this whole sheet ultimately. And then we will pop that into the oven at 375 degrees, and we will bake it for about 15 minutes. And then once they come out of the oven, you let them sit for about another 10 or 15 minutes, let them cool down, and then you have little crackers. You don't need to do any sort of wash on these. They already have a little bit of salt inside, so they're not a super salty cracker. They're just perfect little soup crackers and snack crackers. So I'm gonna continue to do this. You don't have to pick them up one at a time. I don't know why I'm doing it like this. But yeah. We'll see you in a second. Okay, so my crackers just came out of the oven. Look at these guys. How could you not want to just eat all of these? So you got a whole bunch of little oyster cheddar crackers. Now all I need to do, get your big bowl of soup, take a handful of them, sprinkle them on, and then you have a perfect dinner. Oyster crackers and soup. But I'm not gonna show you how to make the soup, you can make your own soup. Anyway, thanks for watching my video. I would love it if you could subscribe down there or whatever. My son is making fun of me because all of his Minecraft YouTubers have millions of followers and I have seven or so. But, you know, we're just starting at this. So I appreciate it. Thank you.